never seen so much blood in a movie. I didn't think that was possible.
Your skin crawls.
It gives me the creepies just thinking about it.
You try to scream.
I actually yelled out in the theater, "Oh my God, no!"
Prepare yourself. We've collected 3 more of the most shocking, most gruesome, and most horrifying movies of all time.
A lot of people told me after they saw it, they just felt horrible, like they wanted to go home and shower.
In this hour, we're traveling from 30 to 16, from a deadly curse.
The Grudge is a really great scene that plays on something that I never saw played on until Psycho, which is how vulnerable you are when you're in the shower.
To a flesh-eating disease.
People were screaming, no, 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 and just went, and the whole place just went nuts.
To truly sick serial killers.
I remember going online when I was writing Saw 2. So I typed in Spanish Inquisition torture devices, and the stuff that comes up, you realize you haven't even touched on what humans have done to each other in real life.
This is Bravo's 30 Even Scarier Movie Moments.
The Grudge was based on a series of Japanese films that collectively called the Ju-on films. For a film that had to be rejiggered for mainstream American audiences, I think it was really skillfully and respectfully done.
The Grudge was the first Japanese film to be remade using the exact same director. Shimizu is fantastic.
I had to rearrange some things to make it fit the American culture and make it suitable for its people.
The original approach was that we were going to kind of move it to the United States, and Sam Raimi had the idea of, no, it might actually be more frightening if we keep it in Tokyo.
There's a sense of dislocation with them that increases the terror of their experience.
The Grudge is about a house where something terrible has occurred, and it actually leaves a stain of the curse of the person that used to live there. Anyone who enters the house is infected by that curse, and they can never escape it.
The Grudge for me was so scary because it wasn't so much about visual effects.
All he uses is that little bit of sound of, and you're like, what is that? It's so scary. I can't explain why it's scary, but it is.
The element of psychological thrill is one that Shimizu does beautifully.
Matthew. Matthew? Matthew, stop it.
When Shimizu directed The Grudge and directed all of us in it, he has a brilliant sense of humor. You would randomly get messages or randomly be standing around and you would hear this little man creep up behind you and do it. And you'd be like, why? You know, so that was sort of hilarious for us.
The Grudge has a really great scene that plays on something that I never saw played on until Psycho, which is how vulnerable you are when you're in the shower.
This is fantastic fear factor because everybody, God willing, gets in the shower.
That little boy with the stringy hair is terrifying. He could be a standard American ghost, except that when he finally opens his mouth, he meows like a cat.
What's great about it is every time you watch the movie, you find something new to be scared of by this curse and The Grudge.
It's just a kid and a cat in a messy apartment, and it's terrifying.
I think Cape Fear is one of the all-time scariest movies.
Cape Fear may have been a remake of a 1962 classic, but Scorsese made it his own. Max Cady, played by Robert De Niro, gets out of jail, and he has plans to take revenge on the family of the attorney who wronged him.
Robert De Niro is terrifying in that movie because no matter what gimmick they come up with to try to catch him, you know he can outwit him.
His commitment to evil is so intense. It's unshakable, and he doesn't think he's doing the wrong thing.
The minute Robert De Niro starts to pick up Illeana Douglas at a bar, you know this is not going to end well.
We talked about the scene a lot, and we thought it'd be more interesting that he first tortures, you know, someone who actually knows the family.
Oh my God. Am I under arrest?
When I got the original script, he puts the handcuffs on her and she says, "Hey, what are you doing? That's, I'm not into that." And it was all very predictable. But I thought the more I'm laughing and trying to play along, the more horrifying it is for the audience.
What he did to me hurt a lot worse than this. I got you now, bitch!
The relationship between De Niro and Juliette Lewis in that movie is so frightening because it could happen to any family.
Every man who's ever had a daughter is probably terrified of the idea of his daughter going off with somebody like Robert De Niro was in that movie.
Do you mind if I put my arm around you? It's okay.
No, I don't mind.
Okay.
You are crawling out of your seat because Juliette Lewis is so innocent in that movie, and he's just weaseling his way into her life, and there's nothing Nick Nolte can do about it.
Cape Fear is the most intense, disturbing, just attack on the senses.
It's a great sort of classic revenge story.
Cabin fever is what I like to call a gore fest.
A bunch of fun-loving kids going into the woods, getting a disease, a flesh-eating virus.
Cabin fever came from an experience I had when I was 19 years old. And it was this horse farm, and I got this infection from the hay in my face. And I started scratching, and I started ripping off chunks of my face. And this entire section of my skin was gone.
Cabin fever is, for a hypochondriac like myself, just everybody's worst nightmare. I didn't kiss a girl for 3 weeks after watching that movie.
I felt so lucky that we had young actors like Serena Vincent and then other veteran actors like Ryder Strong. Now, Ryder Strong had been on Boy Meets World, and if you hated Boy Meets World, you're gonna love seeing Ryder Strong get tortured.
Poor Paul has been trying to keep it together and get the hell out of there. When he opens the door and he sees Karen, the crush that he's had forever, lying on the ground of the shed with her stomach being eaten by a dog.
I pick up the shovel and put her out of her misery. Shooting that scene, you know, I had to pick up the shovel and smack it down to the ground, and there's Eli with two ketchup bottle, squirt bottles full of blood, and he's just sitting there right underneath the camera, and every time I bring the shovel down, he goes. It was the happiest day of his life to be able to cover me in blood.
That leg shaving scene when she finally looks and just starts screaming, it's sort of sounding like an ice skate, and when she goes, people are like, ah, and then the second people are going, no, no, and that third one, people were screaming, no, 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 and just went, and the whole place just went nuts.
As a woman, that made me cringe down to my bones. I actually yelled out in the theater, "Oh my God, no!"
Some reviewer said that cabin fever will do for leg shaving what Psycho did for showers, which I thought was like the highest compliment ever.
Shelby, you seen any of these, I don't know what to call them. They're like big slugs, only they're fast.
But your mama called. She said the toilet's all backed up again.
I would call Slither a horror comedy and a gore fest.
It's got monsters, it's got aliens, it's got disease.
It's really the classic Universal monster movie. I grew up when I was a little kid. Every Saturday morning, I would watch Creature Feature with Bride of Frankenstein or Creature from the Black Lagoon.
This guy's taken all my favorite, like, 80s horror movies, like Night of the Creeps, and compressed it into this, like, one wonderful horror comedy.
Takes place in a small town. Meteor drops into the ground one night, cracks open. There's some alien, something inside of it that goes creeping out.
My guy is the guy who picks up the stick and starts poking it, you know? Until, of course, it pokes back and you become the creature. And that's basically what happens to me.
You never poke a thing that came out of a meteor that is clearly trying to crawl away.
I start evolving and mutating and changing.
Grant. The infected Grant monster goes over to Brenda's house and impregnates her with the slithering worms.
She blows up into a huge, huge sphere, like the size of a barn.
Oh, Jesus! Oh my God, stop doing that! It hurts, bitch! Bill? They're tearing me apart!
First time we see Grant out in the field, he has 15-foot tentacles and a couple of antennae. He is a disgusting-looking mess.
Grant, you're just sick as all. And I'm gonna stay by you, for better or worse.
What's worse?
Slither really falls squarely into the body horror category of films that was set up with David Cronenberg and John Carpenter and Frank Henenlotter back in the 80s.
Slither is an extraordinary success. It's a kind of pastiche of a lot of other horror movies, played with a sort of ironic, self-referential twist that is very, very funny.
Slither is funny and scary. It got me because I would jump and then I would laugh, and that's gold.
Play Misty for me is really a horrifying film. It's one of the best thrillers, I think, that a lot of people don't know about.
Play Misty for me is important historically because it really created the female stalker film. It took a female who became obsessed with this radio DJ, and then, you know, he didn't want to give her any love, and she tries to kill him.
Play Misty for me was totally built on the uncertainty of when something's gonna happen.
It becomes all the more fun to watch a badass like Dirty Harry on the run from a sweet little feminine woman.
I think Clint Eastwood took everybody by surprise with Play Misty for me, and this is his first film as a director. He's very good for a debut filmmaking effort.
There's a lot of very long shots, and you know, why are we seeing it from such a distance? Because he's being watched.
It really plays on the fear of stalkers and of the mystery of never knowing who's on the other end of a phone line. When she calls the first time and asks him to play Misty for her, it draws you into being seduced by what's behind her voice.
Hi, what'll it be?
Play Misty for me.
And she changes from this sweet, innocent person. She goes,
Yeah, get lost, ass!
it's like, oh, God. And you could just see that underneath the surface, there's this psycho bitch, this crazy nut.
That's the scariest thing. She's a beautiful lady, but there's something wrong with her, you know?
The level of that buried wickedness that you really haven't seen coming because you've been just as seduced by her as Clint.
I just don't know what to say to you.
I'm sorry I mistrusted you. I should have known you'd never do anything to spoil it.
To spoil what?
What we have between us.
We don't have a goddamn thing between us. Now, how many ways am I gonna have to say this to you?
I don't care how many ways you say it, it's not true!
I'm gonna have to do to convince you.
It's not.
You know this chick is a freak. And you know she's gonna come back at his ass. That's the scariest part. You know it's coming, but you don't know when.
The movie does a classic and really effective thing where the crazy intruder, the threat to your whole existence, suddenly you find that it's moved in with you and it's part of your life and it's your roommate.
I didn't know you knew David. I didn't realize you and David were friends.
Friends. God, you're dumb.
She's in there waiting for him in the house. She's got that crazy look in her eye, you know, that if she can't have him, nobody can. I bought it.
Play Misty for Me set up an entire genre of sexy psychological thrillers. I would like to think there would not be a Fatal Attraction had there not been a Play Misty for Me.
Red Eye is a scary movie because Wes Craven has this unbelievable ability to make moments suspenseful.
He really entered our nightmares with films like Nightmare on Elm Street and The Hill Have Eyes, and he's really proven that he's going to continue to do so.
Wes Craven is such a genius that he could take a goofy-looking pen like this and make it creepy.
I think this movie was so scary primarily because it played on the idea of the kind of unnatural intimacy that occurs in public transportation.
The setting of a plane for a scary movie is definitely interesting.
You feel completely helpless, and it's like you're basically flying in what could be, you know, a giant coffin. Rachel McAdams' character meets Killian's character, and at first you think he's this really charming, handsome guy. Maybe she's going to find romance on the plane. After being on the plane and taking off, you find that Killian's intent was completely different from what you first thought.
Cillian Murphy in the movie is terrific. It shows you how horror can truly be an actor's medium. And in that film, everything that's scary about it is the way those two interact.
Movies like Red Eye are much more terrifying because something like that can actually happen. Things like that actually do happen. Knowing that you've been followed and stalked by a strange man, it's pretty bad.
Hand That Rocks the Cradle was a great horror film because it was a really relatable horror film.
I remember the reviews coming out. I remember people talking about it being sort of a fetal attraction.
Hand That Rocks the Cradle was directed by Curtis Hanson, who later went on to do L.A. Confidential and 8 Mile. And this is one of his early films, and it's terrific. I mean, it's very, very suspenseful.
Very few horror movies are written by women, and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle is written by a woman, Amanda Silver, and she does an amazing job of tapping into every woman's worst fear on every level.
The Hand That Rocks the Cradle is about a couple in the Seattle area. Myself, Annabella Sciorra, we are in need of a nanny, which is where Rebecca De Mornay comes in.
She comes in and she takes away Annabella Sciorra's whole life, and she just creates this nightmare world for this woman that she has this hidden agenda against.
It's really scary to think that you could let a woman into your house and she could begin to undermine all of the bonds that you've created with your children and with your husband.
The Rebecca De Mornay character, because she's a great villain.
She's psychotic. You don't know what she's really capable of. She's got a really cold exterior and this boiling, like, volcanic rage that's just always just under the surface.
The scene where she's breastfeeding the child is just incredibly disturbing.
Rebecca De Mornay goes into the nursery and she looks down at the baby and she lifts up this pillow, and you think she's going to go in there and smother the baby.
imagine another woman breastfeeding my baby is like worse than having, you know, Jason come around the corner with a knife.
The best part of the movie is when Peyton gets impaled on the white picket fence at the end. I mean, that's the triumph.
I got to watch the stunt double fall out the window and hit the picket fence, which is kind of really symbolic in a way.
You know, getting locked up is not enough, and the movie satisfies.
We shot a couple of different endings to that, and I think the one that they chose was the best. I mean, there was cheering in the theater. It was, thank God, the Wicked Witch is dead.
I love Manhunter. I love that film. Manhunter is such a disturbing film because it is one of, I think, the most successful serial killer films.
It was directed by Michael Mann, who created Miami Vice, who did Heat, The Insider.
It's about a policeman. His name is Will Graham. He's played by William K. Peterson. He's a profiler. He's trained in catching serial killers.
Incredibly well acted. Tom Noonan, who played the killer, and is fabulous and is scary and is both heartbreaking and terrifying because you believe him as a killer.
The crew was kind of scared of me. One day I came in and it was starting to get dark, and I was in the studio and he asked if I wanted the lights on. And I said, no, Francis, that doesn't touch the lights. Or something like that. I was just goofing around. So then I couldn't put the lights on anymore. So I would spend all my time in the dark, which I guess was funny.
One of the most disturbing sequences in this movie is one that involves Freddie Lowndes, played by Stephen Lang, a tabloid reporter who is conducting his own investigation into the Red Dragon murders.
So I kidnap him, mostly because I want him to understand who I am. So I bring him back to my house and I show him pictures of the families that I've been, pursuing.
Open your eyes. And if you don't open your eyes, I'll staple your eyelids to your forehead. Well, here I am. Mrs. Leeds, do you see? Yes. Freddie Lowndes, your photograph. No. No what? No, not me, please.
It's also very disturbing because of the utter helplessness of Freddie Lowndes, who is at this point strapped into an old-fashioned wheelchair and is eventually set on fire in it.
The one thing they did cut was when I'm pouring the gasoline over him. He's kind of knocked out and taped into his chair, and then I pour the gasoline over and he wakes up and we start talking, and then I light him on fire.
This film makes you see his madness. You see the reason in his madness in a way that you very rarely do in serial killer movies.
So when a movie like Manhunter, in a very intelligent adult way, takes you as an audience and forces you into the head of a serial killer, that's very disturbing.
I guess you could say I just want to have a meaningful relationship with someone special.
American Psycho is a really scary movie.
It's very, very violent, but it's also very funny. It's the ultimate knife in the 80s.
Scary Yuppies, very clever film, and the best thing it has going for it, I think, is Christian Bale.
He was like a Ted Bundy type guy, really smart, intelligent, good-looking, conniving killer.
When Christian Bale came in to audition for the role of Patrick Bateman, I felt like he was the first actor I'd met who completely saw the character the way I did.
Christian was phenomenally committed to creating the character. He transformed his body. He had his teeth capped to get that perfect sort of Tom Cruise smile.
He's like the monster in all of us. I don't think you can ever watch American Psycho and feel superior to him because he's so much like everyone at their most vain and self-important.
Behind the surface of this very smooth, very pristine
main appearance is this world of horror, where he kills his friends, or in which he's actually fantasizing about performing all of these acts.
Did you know that Whitney Houston's debut LP had 4 #1 singles on it?
Patrick Bateman's thing is that when he's about to kill someone, he starts to obsessively talk about music.
Every time that he starts talking about music, you're going to be scared. In this first murder, he talks about Huey Lewis and then brings out the axe.
You like Huey Lewis on the news? They're okay.
When we were rehearsing this scene, Christian said to me out of the blue, I think I should moonwalk, because it's such an 80s film.
He's been compared to Elvis Costello, but I think Huey has a far more bitter, cynical sense of humor.
Of course, even his axe is more attractive than most people's axes.
I think their undisputed masterpiece is Hip to Be Square. A song so catchy, most people probably don't listen to the lyrics, but they should, because it's not just about the pleasures of conformity and the importance of trends. It's also a personal statement about the band itself. Hey, Paul! Ah! Start getting a reservation at Dorkin now, you stupid bastard!
The music was good. It was a good axe scene. It had all the elements of every horror movie that takes place in the woods, only it was done in a nice, upscale New York environment.
Well, one of the interesting things about this movie is you could make the argument that all of these killings are actually just taking place within the twisted fantasy life that Patrick Bateman has created for himself. And the film never really addresses that, which I think makes it more effective.
Dead Alive was probably one of the coolest cinematic experiences I've ever had in my life.
Okay, let's just be honest here. There's never been a bloodier film.
My whole life, I've been such a gore hound, and every time I saw a movie, I wanted to see more blood, more blood, more blood. But Dead Alive was the first movie that actually quenched my thirst for gore.
I swear to God, people were like laughing hysterically and screaming in terror throughout the entire film. And it was the rowdiest movie I've ever been to in my life. It's classic.
Dead Alive was directed by Peter Jackson, who's one of the greatest directors in the world. And if you watch that film, you can see the kind of directorial skill that's demonstrated in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and in King Kong.
Peter Jackson's earlier films really typifies the kind of humor that Peter Jackson has, you know, and those are the films, you know, in my opinion, where he did so well, which was balance gore with comedy.
I mean, there had never really been the full-on splatstick movie before, where he was using gore for gags.
There's that scene where they're eating their porridge and pieces of this woman start to fall off, like she's got a boil, and it like erupts and the pus lands in the porridge.
There's a big party scene in which it just dissolves into the Zombie Island massacre of all time.
Party's over.
Peter Jackson would cut to like behind the lawnmower, and you just see like limbs just flying everywhere.
Mowing down everybody. Like, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen.
You don't watch it going, oh man, this is disgusting. You just watch it and just laugh throughout the entire sequence. That's what Peter does, you know. He takes his horror moments to such extreme where they become really, really funny.
...2001 to me is maybe the best science fiction movie ever. People don't normally think of it as a horror film, but it really is a horror film in a lot of different ways.
When it first came out in 1968, when I was 7 years old, it completely blew me away. I didn't understand it. But that was probably as terrified as I've ever been of anything.
2001 warns us about putting too much dependence into artificial intelligence and
machines.
Artificial intelligence is extremely scary because it makes us doubt that there's anything meaningful about us as human beings. Are we going to be taken over by something that's more highly evolved than us?
2001: A Space Odyssey tells the story about a mission to this point in space out near Jupiter. There's a computer by the name of HAL 9000 on this mission.
HAL is the whole environment that these astronauts exist in, and he's in control of everything.
HAL makes the decision that the human beings on the ship are against him and begins to attack, you know, the people on the ship.
When that thing turns evil, it's just this cold, clinical eye staring you. It doesn't blink. It watches your every move.
The computer seemed so entertaining and benign, and then to have that computer turn on everybody without ever changing its tone of voice, that's what really freaked me out.
There's a moment in 2001 where Dave is trying to get back inside the spaceship, and Hal won't open the door for him.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Hal's voice is just trippy. It's so even and smooth and calm as he's doing these awful, horrible things.
It's an incredibly intellectual movie, and yet it operates on this completely nonverbal, visceral level. And that's what I think the scariest of movies do.
2001 really, really taps into both our dependence on technology and our fear of technology. That what happened if you're hooked up to some machine that's supporting your life, and that machine decided to cut you off? And as computers get smarter and smarter, it just seems like we're only getting closer to that.
Fear is basically one of those crazy, jealous boyfriend, I'm gonna kill you movies.
Mark Wahlberg is what is scary about Fear. His performance is so freaky.
Reese Witherspoon's character starts falling for Marky Mark's character.
He obsesses over this girl, and he won't let anything get in between them. And I think that is a terrifying notion.
There's a few really great scenes where you figure out, okay, this guy is nuts. Like after Reese's father approaches him and tells him to, you know, stay away, don't talk to my daughter, he starts beating his chest, and you don't really know what's going on or why he's doing it. You think maybe it's some, like, freaky Tarzan cry.
That moment where Mark Wahlberg switches from being the sweet boyfriend into screaming, "Let me into the house!" right into that peephole. He turns on a dime, and it's just great. Fear is really scary because you are sort of falling for Mark Wahlberg the way Reese Witherspoon is, and then it turns dark.
Love makes people crazy, so that's what made this film bizarre. It's almost like you never know who's sitting across from you. You can't judge a book by its cover.
Army of Darkness is one of my all-time favorites. It had a really good blend of comedy and violence. And a little sex thrown in, too.
I just had a ball with Army of Darkness. It's my kind of balls out, kind of wacky, you know, horror thing.
Army of Darkness is the last installment of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead series. And in this particular film, Ash has been propelled into the past to the medieval ages.
Ash is sent back to save people of the time from an attack by the undead.
Army of Darkness really shows what a badass Bruce Campbell is.
It's one of the trademark scenes of the movie when Bruce was trapped in the pit and this chainsaw was thrown down, becomes a part of his arm.
All of a sudden, this one demon pops up. we had another character that we called the Pit Bitch, and she comes out of the wall. Originally, Sam wanted both those two demons to be the same, but we went ahead and built the creature anyhow, and we had one of the guys in the shop, Bill Bryan, dressed up as it. Sam comes in and looks at it, it's like, I don't know, buddy, I don't know. And then Bill leaps towards Sam, and Sam, why, it's the greatest monster I've ever seen. It's fantastic. And he just loved it, because we scared Sam Raimi, you know? And that's how we got that creature into the movie.
Greg and Howard had created this witch, and it was 4.5 hours worth of makeup. And they even did my hands with broken nails, really gnarly.
We did a makeup on our contact lenses, and as Sam would say, witchy poo chin and witchy poo nose.
Bruce and I choreographed this fight with the stunt coordinator, Chris Doyle.
Yo, she-bitch. Let's go.
Bruce just shoots me over his shoulder like an afterthought. So macho.
Bruce Campbell, he can do no wrong in my eyes. He is one of the great horror actors.
After that movie, I was so hoping that Bruce Campbell would be like this huge major star. And I think horror fans still feel like he's going to have that breakthrough movie where he's going to be a major star like Tom Cruise. And to us, he is. He's bigger than Tom Cruise.
Groovy.
Christine, the movie is scary because there's this car. It's alive. It's got some sort of soul or spirit inside it, and you can't control it.
Christine, this idea that this car is going to run you down was this evil twist on kind of the 60s notion of the Herbie movie.
You don't know what it is that's taken over this car, but you know it's not going to be good.
Christine is about this little introverted guy named Arnie. One day he finds this classic Plymouth in some junk heap, and he buys it and restores it.
Very little of Christine, if any, is visual effects. I mean, they built 12 cars, and the way they shot the car repairing itself was they actually had hydraulics that pulled it in, and then they shot it all in reverse.
The first time that Christine actually takes real action is one of the more blatant scary scenes in the film.
Arnie and Lee are out at this drive-in theater, and it's pouring rain.
I get out of the car because the windshield wipers stop, and you know, and you sort of feel something's coming, but you don't know quite what.
Oh,
They put like thousands and thousands of watts of light inside the car. And the whole car was this blaze of light in this dark drive-in theater. And it was sort of ghostly and magical and really disturbing.
Christine's kind of come to take out the last people who still matter to Arnie so that she can have him for herself.
The car wouldn't stop. The car was a maniac.
We've all had a little taste of that sensation that an inanimate object is suddenly, torturing us. So all that Stephen King did in writing Christine and that John Carpenter did in making the film was take that and extend it. And I think that's what makes for a lot of the best scary stuff.
2 was so scary because you never really knew what was going to happen next.
It's a squirm movie. I mean, it's one of those movies where you just sit there and you squirm.
Basically, Saw 2 is about a mastermind serial killer, Jigsaw, who brings a group of people into this house, and he creates all these different obstacles for them to see how far they will go to save their own life.
I remember going online when I was writing Saw 2. So I typed in Spanish Inquisition torture devices, and the stuff that comes up, you realize you haven't even touched on what humans have done to each other in real life.
We wanted the contraptions to be real, and we wanted to make sure that they existed on a realistic plane. In my mind, that's something that really makes them scary.
In Saw 2, I think the most disturbing scene is where Amanda has to jump into the pit of needles.
I was just running through the different things that kind of make me ill. One of them's needles. And I was thinking, imagine if you had an entire pit filled with dirty, used hypodermic needles.
They're real needles, so the producers had to hire 4 people to just safety the hypodermic needles. I think the final number count was 80,000 needles in that pit.
There's needles sticking out of every part of her, like hanging like this, and it's just like so freaky. I had to go like that through that part.
Doing that scene was just utter horror. Was just terrible.
The razor box room really scared me because I knew it worked like that. It's not like, again, something we dreamed up, and, you know, it's real.
It's razor blades that are interlocked together. If you try and retract your arm, it catches and the blades start to slice into your arm.
Watching scenes where characters cut their wrists.
That was written as 1/8 of a page on the script. It was supposed to be one shot. It ended up, in my mind, being one of the cooler scenes I've saw too.
The series of films keeps asking you over and over, what would you do to survive? You know, how much can you take? What are you willing to do? And I mean, that's what is so great about the series.
I think The Exorcism of Emily Rose is one of the scarier movies because of the reality of it.
It's based on a true story of an actual exorcism.
I first came across the story when I met a guy who was an expert in demonology and in the occult, and he gave me a copy of a book about the real case. And we took that material and adapted it into a screenplay.
I am Lucifer, the devil in the flesh.
It's honestly such a scary movie that I can't even watch it all the way through.
Jennifer Carpenter's performance was amazing. I mean, I believed every bit of it.
Oh my God, I'm glad I did not get the part because I could not have done that.
She truly felt possessed by the devil. Yeah, the things she could do with her body.
And her voice. I mean, they just seemed inhuman.
I believe we were told that they saved on special effects because of the things that she could literally do with her body.
The special effects team had built a dummy. They put the dummy down and they were arranging it in these really awkward ways. And I thought, I could do that. Let me try to do that.
Can you hear me? The script that was written had a good number of visual effects that didn't end up in the film. And the reason why was because her performance was so strong.
And it is so frightening because it's like, you don't know, is she human, is she not human?
There was one scene when we were shooting The Exorcism in the barn when Jennifer Carpenter, who tends to get lost in her performance moments, became very hostile in her expression toward Tom Wilkinson. I remember I was sitting at the monitor with Tom Stern, the director of photography, and Tom Stern started going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, just looking at her face on the monitor.
All I remember is somebody saying, be mad at him. So I just had this look of you know, if my eyes are completely black and I'm just snarling, and they stopped.
And when we finished the shot, the camera operator came running back and he looked genuinely frightened. And he says, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" And he goes, "I was shooting it and I was looking at her, and the whole time I was thinking, she just became possessed. She's actually possessed. We gotta get out of here."
Imagine the most horrible, horrific entity ever entering your body and taking you over and forcing you to do things. And whew, it's some heavy stuff. It gives me the creepies just thinking about it.
Like Scanners, it was mind-blowing. I'd never seen veins pop out on somebody's arm before. I'd never seen somebody start bleeding from the eyes and heads explode.
David Cronenberg doesn't make straight-out horror films. Every film that he makes is something that you've never seen before.
Scanners really fall into that intellectual horror, cerebral film that David Cronenberg just does so well.
Scanners is about these telepathic people. They can do it all. They can read your mind, they can hear what you're thinking, they can move things.
The idea that these people are out there, these scanners who can read our thoughts, they hear all the things that we would probably like to keep secret, and that can be very disconcerting.
You know, you can't talk about that film without talking about Michael Ironside and the evil, evil character he plays in this film.
And he's come to kind of send a message. The scanners are not a force for good. We have powers that we can use to assert our own sort of dominance and control. And Cameron, his brother, doesn't want to join in this plot to take over. And Daryl just says, fine, have it your way. We're going to do it the scanner way, and I'm going to suck your brains dry.
Scenes ever put on film. Again, I mean, when I saw that, from that day forward, I was just addicted to Cronenberg stuff. I mean, that moment just grabs you.
That's why Cronenberg's movies have been able to live so long, because at the core of all his films, he has something to say, and I think that's the most important thing with a lot of genre films that manage to survive for so long.
Dawn of the Dead remake is one of the best remakes since John Carpenter's The Thing. You finally got to have a zombie movie that showed the scope of the zombie plague.
There's something just naturally, primordially frightening about being eaten alive. It's just really one of the most horrific concepts.
The original Dawn of the Dead is a masterpiece, and I didn't feel like I wanted to step on the toes of that movie. So I just said, okay, you know, let's take the same scenario, but let's see what other interesting roads we could end up on.
I took the central premise of people trapped in a mall during a zombie apocalypse and then built a complete new story around that.
The first thing that he did was make zombies fast. The original Dawn of the Dead, they're very slow.
The fast-moving zombies add a whole nother thing where, you're screwed. So it was kind of exciting to see that.
I just wanted them to go wham and be violent and visceral and just in your face, and you can't get away from them.
The most horrifying scene in the new Dawn of the Dead was the scene in which Sarah Polley's character wakes up the morning after she spent a long, long night working in the emergency room. And the next thing she knows, her husband is a zombie. That's my worst nightmare, the idea that you could go to bed and everything's just fine. and then wake up in the morning and you're living in like the third circle of hell.
The zombie birthing scene is one of the scarier moments in that film.
We had the fake stomach, and then we had little fake hands to push, little fists and feet that we were pushing against the stomach.
To see her so insane and possessed and so dangerous, and at the same time doing this natural, innocent, beautiful thing. The whole thing was chilling.
You think, oh, it's going to be this rubbery, fake-looking baby, but that thing looked insane.
Zombies are scary because they're just humans. There's no trick to them. They're just the horde of humanity coming to kill you.
Zombie movies are going to be around forever because they speak to our most primal fears. We're afraid of predators and we're afraid of disease. And zombie movies prey on all of these different fears.
Wolf Creek is a very self-conscious throwback to the really brutal exploitation movies of the 1970s.
Wolf Creek is a great film in the tradition of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, dark, no holds barred, like people just dying, getting chopped up.
Basic story of Wolf Creek is a guy and two girls that are making their way across the Australian outback, and this is sort of the dark side of that.
I like the look of it because it's shot very rough and raw, and it has any movie that has a move feels like you are there. The vibe always works more for me, Even when nothing's happening, it just feels more disturbing because it feels real.
The creepy thing about Wolf Creek is that it really happened, that it's based on a true story, and that a guy was actually arrested and charged for these crimes.
The Ivan Milat murders that happened along Australia's east coast, where backpackers were being kidnapped off the road, and they would find these bodies just cut to shreds. The violence of it was so intense.
I usually like people isolated at the mercy of some kind of maniac, hillbilly guy, and the accents always make it scary.
The scene in Wolf Creek that really got me was the woman who you think is going to be the heroine, who you think is going to lead her friends out of this horrible situation, suddenly and unexpectedly gets stabbed in the back by the bad guy.
That slightly friendly demeanor that just creeped me out the way John Jarratt played it. There's a character covered in blood screaming for their life, and John Jarratt's just like, oh, now don't cry. It's not that hard. It's not that bad, is it?
Down, that's not gonna kill you, right?
Next thing you know, her spinal cord is severed, which has got to be one of the great shock moments of the last 10 years.
Making a head on a stick. Because once your spine's severed, right? Oh, that's what you are, eh? Head on a stick.
She's still alive. She's aware of everything, but she's totally paralyzed. And that is one of the more horrifying things I've seen in a horror movie in a long time.
I've driven across the outback. You get out of your car and you scream. Not a soul in the world is going to hear you. No one.
That feeling of helplessness in the face of this utter chaos is something that Wolf Creek captures disturbingly well.
The Stepford Wives is a great movie. I had the privilege of seeing The Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby in the same weekend, and I have never been so paranoid about being a woman in my life.
It was such a brilliant movie. It was so smart, it was so clever, and it was so scary.
The original Stepford Wives is about a woman, coming from the big city, kind of moving into a small town that the men are taking their wives and replacing them with robots who basically just want to cook and clean and have sex.
So it's scary that they're killing the real wives. But on one hand, in a twisted way, it's kind of like, gee, wouldn't mind having one of these, at least for a couple of weeks.
Stepford Wives kind of goes on the same model as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where you're trying to warn people that this thing is taking over, and then by the time you get there, you're talking to them and they're already won.
The best scene in The Stepford Wives is the scene where Catherine Ross has to decide if she's going to stab her best friend in the kitchen because she suspects that her best friend is a robot.
Do you take cream? Look, I bleed. Oh, that's right. You take it black.
Well, I cut myself. I bleed.
Do you bleed? Why, look at your hand. No, you look. Joanna. How could you do a thing like that? How could you do a thing like that? I was just going to give you coffee. I thought we were friends. I thought we were friends.
What she says when she stabs her is, I bleed, do you bleed? And then where does she stab her? Not really in the stomach, a little lower. It's really crazy. And it's pretty much a stab in the pussy.
I think it's every woman's sort of worst fear, that that's what men really want, is Stepford Wives. So to me, the movie is really terrifying.
The idea that men want the perfect woman and they don't really care much about substance or bonding. It's every woman's worst nightmare.
Children of the Corn is incredibly frightening because it plays on something so simple, and that is you can't control children.
I couldn't see the Children of the Corn because it was too scary for me. I mean, just the idea of kids with glowing eyes, I can't deal with.
Stephen King has tapped into something, boy. I mean, he's kind of the it guy for horror, isn't he? When you think horror, you think Stephen King.
Children of the Corn is one of those movies that even when I see today, it still creeps me out. I mean, that kid, when he steps on screen with his hat on, looking through the window, Isaac is such a presence. He's one of those characters that doesn't have to do anything or say anything. Just looking at him freaks you out.
He wants you too, Malachi.
Malachi, for a little kid, he kicks a lot of ass, you know? And there's that famous scene where he's standing in the middle of town screaming for the adults to come out, and he's screaming, Outlander, Outlander. You know, he has Linda Hamilton at knife point.
Outlander! We have your woman! She still lives! Outlander, maybe you don't hear so well. Outlander! Her blood will spill unless you give yourself up. You won't wait much longer. Night is coming. Night is his time.
This is my first film, and I'm geeked up. If you look at the film, you will see that my fingers are like so deep into her cheek when I have her face. It's like, you know, halfway, my finger's halfway into her cheek. Of course, the next day, you know, she's got bruises.
Outlander! Come on! Come on! Come on, Outlander!
That line, Outlander, has become one of those famous lines in pop culture. I've had it screamed at me many times, somebody driving down the street or, or in a mall. I think that movie was very much teenage angst. I think it was very much a teenage fantasy of what if we could get rid of all of the adults and run our own town.
The idea that kids in a group could overtake this town, slaughter everybody, and set up their own society, it's a really terrifying concept.
Next. There were times when we were shooting when sharks would show up that we didn't hire. I called them the non-union sharks. I was constantly on edge all day, every day, worrying that a shark was going to show up at any moment.
As we count down our Even Scarier Movies.
This can't be happening.
is such a horrifying film on so many levels. It's a film that tricks you into forgetting that you're seeing a horror film.
It's about two scuba divers being left behind. They're floating out there in shark-infested waters.
It really creates a mood of suspense, a mood of terror with very little.
The threat comes from where they can't see, which is under the surface of the water.
Oh God, I don't know what's worse, seeing them or not seeing them.
One of the scariest scenes in this film is when Daniel is bitten by a shark for the first time. It starts off in a very kind of almost lighthearted way because they've just found candy, so they think that this is, you know, they can actually survive for a while.
I don't see it. Are you okay? Are you I don't know. Oh my God! Honey!
I was scared with him in the water because he really seemed like he'd been bitten, and his terror and his fear and everything was just so moving.
It hurts.
That was the first day of shooting. It was my first film, and the first, shot of the moment was me getting in the water with 50 sharks. That was pretty intimidating.
There were times when we were shooting when sharks would show up that we didn't hire. I called them the non-union sharks. I was constantly on edge all day, every day, worrying that a shark was going to show up at any moment.
Just stay where you are. That's nothing's gonna be okay. You hold on. You hold on, Daniel. You don't leave me out here by myself.
We've run out of options. We're completely at the mercy of nature, and we can't even help ourselves. And it's just, I think it's just a heartbreaking scene.
We shot it in daylight, and our director, Chris Kentis, was able to time it down and take the light away to make it actually appear as if it were a night scene.
What's worse than coming up from sort of this beautiful scuba dive and there's no one there? There's no boat. There's nothing.
I think the reason why open water struck such a chord with people is because of the reality of it. People go diving all the time. They go on vacations all the time. And this is something that could absolutely happen to anybody.
The thing that makes Land of the Dead scary is that the zombies are hideous creatures, but they're in fact us.
Like, I'm not scared of monsters or anything like that, but zombies freak me out.
This is the last film in George Romero's zombie series. And starting from 1968 to now, his zombies evolve.
Unlike some of the previous zombie films, what makes them really scary is their ability to organize, their ability to learn.
The zombies in Land of the Dead have crossed over a threshold and become harder than ever to dismiss. When I made Night of the Living Dead, I had no idea whether I would ever make another one of these. It was 2001, and I wrote a script for another zombie film. And it was about homelessness and AIDS. Then all of a sudden, 9/11 happened. And nobody wanted to touch, sort of a hard-hitting film like that. And so I stuck it on the shelf, and I waited for, a couple of years, and then took it back out, and then realized, wow, this is just more pertinent, in fact, now.
One of the most terrifying scenes of Land of the Dead is when the zombies actually go underwater to invade this fortress, Fiddler's Green, this luxury skyscraper where all of the rich people have hidden out.
I use zombies as an excuse to make movies about something else. My movies are much more sort of political. They're about revolution.
Land of the Dead says one day the zombies are going to be us. They're learning skills that are going to make them as if they were human beings. And that's one of the most terrifying things.
Boy, the next word that comes out of your mouth better be some brilliant Mark Twain, because it's definitely getting chiseled on your tombstone.
God, Devil's Rejects is one of the best horror sequels since Evil Dead 2.
Devil's Rejects is a brutal movie.
A lot of people who told me after they saw it, they just felt horrible, like they wanted to go home and shower.
Devil's Rejects is a sequel to A House of a Thousand Corpses. It takes place in 1978, and it's sort of a road rampage movie. You know, it's like the Manson family on acid.
The inspiration for the movie came from sort of like non-horror sources for the most part. I mean, the look and feel of the movie is more inspired by, you know, Westerns.
Rob Zombie really understands the idea of the charismatic villain. You know, if it's Alex in Clockwork Orange or Darth Vader, there's that villain that's fascinating, that you love, and that's what he did with Otis.
Where the have you been?
Otis is like this disgusting, horrible person, and I know that even making it, Bill was having trouble sometimes being that character.
There's a scene between Otis and this traveling Western singing group. He pretty viciously attacked them, cut the one guy's face off of his head.
Otis comes in and he's wearing Wendy's husband's face as a mask and walking around and joking about it. And then he takes the face off and he puts it down in Wendy's face.
To inform you that the Banjo and Sullivan show will be canceled for tonight.
By far, I think the most frightening moment, you were not expecting that visual.
Just the fact that Otis and Baby couldn't stop laughing, were more like horrified at how unshocking they think it is. They think it's hilarious.
I stepped off the set, and Rob was standing there, and I just looked at him, and I just went, no, this is bumming me out. And that's when Rob looked at me and said, art is not safe.
What I loved was how Zombie took that scene, and you could say, oh, you know, okay, well, that's creepy, you know, but he takes it one step further.
You're just like rooting for it. Your heart's just going like this. You're like, my God, just run, rip the mask off and run. She runs flat into a truck.
How could you not love that?
It's one of the most horrible scenes I've ever seen. And I think Zombie's a great director.
You could tell that Rob Zombie absorbed and thought about every single aspect of this movie, and he nailed it.
Vertigo is classic horror because it's psychological.
Vertigo was like just a super creepy movie in general. You didn't really quite know what was happening.
Vertigo, in my opinion, is Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece.
Alfred Hitchcock takes an everyday, normal man and gives him a fear that a lot of us can relate to, the fear of heights.
It plays so brilliantly on the fears that we have and how they manifest themselves.
Jimmy Stewart plays a retired San Francisco police detective, and an old friend calls him back into service to keep an eye on his wife, and the more he learns about her, the more he becomes obsessed with her.
One of the scariest and most upsetting parts of the movie is to see him lose it.
Where you going?
One final thing I have to do. And I'll be free of the past.
The scene where he forces her out on top of the tower has a fantastic twist to it.
Is he gonna kill her? Is he not gonna kill her? Like, you're really kind of on the edge of your seat. Then you see this looming shadow come out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh, run!
I heard voices. God have mercy.
She just falls out the window and dies.
They didn't call Alfred Hitchcock the master of suspense for nothing.
Vertigo is an apt metaphor for falling in a hopeless love affair.
What better make you insane than love?
Old Boy's great. Old Boy is one of the 10 best movies of the past 10 years.
Old Boy is one of the coolest sort of revenge thrillers I've seen in a long time. The Koreans are just making films that are just so confronting.
Old Boy is scary because you just don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, anything could happen in that movie.
Old Boy is a story about a man who is kidnapped and placed in a room for 15 years with no explanation of why he was being put there.
And when he gets out, he goes on this journey of trying to figure out who kidnapped him and why. Old Boy was directed by Park Chan-wook. The films that he makes are so visually arresting, but they are also unclassifiable. There's nothing like them.
There's something so dark you think, well, he's not going to go there, and it gets worse and worse.
내 15년을 고스란히 갚아주겠다. 한 개씩 뽑힐 때마다 1년씩 남는 거야.
Let me just say that's a very hard scene for me to watch. Not many people realizes this, but I am very squeamish.
He learns of the coup de grace in his torture, and that is the realization that since being released, he's been sort of manipulated into sleeping with the daughter he never knew. And he realizes that they've now been having this incestuous affair, unbeknownst to both of them.
Our main villain is planning to tell the daughter everything, and the main character is saying, I'll cut off my tongue, I'll do anything to show you how sorry I am for what happens.
It's a devastating scene. And the reason it works is because it means something. He believes that he's going to earn someone's forgiveness. So it's not even just the grossness of it, it's the underlying emotion is where I think the horror really comes from.
The twist, when it happens, you're so repulsed. You're so sick, but so fascinated. I mean, Old Boy is one of those movies where after I saw it, I couldn't speak.
Videodrome is a really ballsy movie.
It's one of the greatest horror films of all time. It's all about how the media controls you and how us watching TV controls our perception of the world. And David Cronenberg externalizes it.
Cronenberg really explored in many of his films, the loss of control of our bodies. If it's in Shivers or They Came From Within or even Videodrome.
Videodrome is about Max Wren, played by James Woods, who discovers this TV signal which is distorting our thought patterns.
It plunges him into this world of hallucinations and horrifying notions, and he's completely unable to separate what's real and what's not real.
When I was a kid, I saw the video cassette box, and there was a scene of, it looked like a hand coming out of the television, as if the glass had kind of turned to flesh, and something was pressing out. Literally, I hadn't seen the film yet, and I was having nightmares from the images on the box.
The transformations that the character of Max Wren undergoes in Videodrome are both repellent and yet so clever that they kind of stick with you. Most people remember when Max has a slit in his belly.
And he starts to play with it, and suddenly his hand slips inside.
You heard all these things like don't watch TV too close, you'll get cancer, there's x-rays, and then you see this guy who gets shot and it's almost like his body rips open. And there's all these weird chunks and his head is split open, and it's these horrible cancer tumors that have kind of instantly exploded out of this guy.
It's very Cronenberg. Nobody dies normally in a Cronenberg movie.
It takes a genius like David Cronenberg to come up with this concept that you get sucked into the TV and it becomes part of your flesh. It's, you know, this metaphor for television and media becoming part of us, becoming part of the culture and part of who we are.
Get the video, Joe! Long live the new flesh!
Saw it was just so awful and scary.
It's one of those films where the director's daring you to keep looking.
I designed the whole film to make it look like it was a pressure cooker. We wanted to come up with a story that would keep you guessing all the way to the very end.
Saw is an extremely clever movie. It's a movie in which the serial killer, who's nicknamed Jigsaw, actually doesn't kill people. Jigsaw sets puzzles for them. They either have to do something incredibly awful or they're going to die.
All the characters in Saw are united by the fact that they're caught in a trap.
A character named Amanda, played by Shawnee Smith, wakes up kind of strapped to a chair, and she's got this kind of monstrous rusted device around her neck.
I have to get the key, which is inside of the body on the floor, or my head will explode outward.
I think what makes something scary a lot of times is the anticipation. One of the smartest thing, we did in the script was to set up this impending danger.
He doesn't want us to cut through our chains. He wants us to cut through our feet.
The whole film culminates with Dr. Gordon, played by Cary Elwes, having to make a choice. He has to get out of this chain that's around his ankle or let his family die.
What are you doing?
People would just virtually flip out of their chair when he started cutting. You knew that someone was going to cut a limb off with this hacksaw. It just took 90 minutes to get there.
When I finished the first cut for the first Saw, I turned to Lee and I said, oh my goodness, I've made a PG-13 drama. I actually then snuck out one day and we shot additional close-ups, sort of like kind of much more gorier moments.
Saw does such a great job of pulling the audience into the movie because every single trap, you really put yourself in going, what would I do? What would I do? Would I reach in that body? Would I grab that key?
How do you not, as an audience member, freak out and walk home saying, that blew me away?
Clockwork Orange, I think, is Kubrick's best film. It's like one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie ever.
Clockwork Orange is one of those movies that you see and you're forever changed.
Its fundamental notion of human nature is profoundly bleak and profoundly dark.
Malcolm McDowell as Alex in A Clockwork Orange truly created a terrifying character.
He and his lads, who are a bunch of young ruffians, terrorize people in a very wealthy section of London.
These guys are scary because they just don't care. They're pure and simple, narcissistic psychopaths.
The big scene in Clockwork Orange is when they randomly drive out to this old man's house and they rape his wife and they tie him down and force him to watch.
The rape scene is really horrendous. It seems so real. I mean, it feels like you're watching somebody get raped.
You're horrified by it, but you can't look away because it's taking place in such a stylized, entertaining way.
Singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling! I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark up the the sun's in my heart, and I'm ready for love. Let the stormy cloud chase everyone Along with the rain, I've a smile on my face. You ready for love? Walk down the lane with a happy refrain. And I'm singing, just singing in the rain.
One of the great things that Stanley Kubrick did in Clockwork Orange was take the song Singin' in the Rain, a gleeful song about how amazing it is to fall in love, and uses it to score a brutal, vicious rape scene. It's horrifying. It really is. It's extremely disturbing.
That's a scene that has never lost its power to disturb me. And I've seen the film 15 times. I've written about it. I've thought about it. And yet, I see that scene that still both involves me and completely chills and repels me. So that's pretty powerful.
Clockwork Orange suggests that fundamentally we really are all beasts, and that the best thing civilization can do is keep the beast at bay for a while.
I do not normally like torture films, but I love Hostel.
Hostel scared the crap out of me. It really did. It really freaked me out.
Hostel's gonna do for backpacking in Europe what Jaws did for going to the beach. No one's gonna go backpacking after seeing this movie.
I wouldn't even leave the house if I saw something like this. The original idea for Hostel actually came from a conversation I had with Ain't It Cool News webmaster Harry Knowles. We were talking about horrible, disturbing things we'd seen on the internet. And he told me about a site where you could go to Thailand and for $10,000 walk into a room and shoot someone in the head.
Hostel is the story of some kids who go backpacking in Europe. Josh and Paxton find out that there's this magical place, this hostel in Slovakia. It turns out that the hostel is a recruiting ring for businessmen who want to torture people.
Some of the torture scenes are really unbearable to watch. Like, it's not about putting your hands up, it's about, like, I actually can't look at this right now.
Derek Richardson's scene where he gets his Achilles tendon cut, he's conscious, he's aware, and he knows his attacker. And the stuff that must be running through your mind, I can't even imagine.
Please, I didn't do shit to you. What the Please, no, sir, please, stop.
I remember I was the only one at the monitor who could watch. You know, normally you have the script supervisor, the makeup person, other people, and it was just empty. It was just me standing there because people were so upset. And a lot of crew members told me that they had nightmares from that shooting. And that had never happened to me before.
I remember the scene where Paxton is in the locker room and he has disguised himself as a torture killer in order to escape. And he runs in to the American businessman.
I want to feel it, you know what I mean? I just want to feel that shit. So I don't know what to, I'm thinking, what do you think I should do?
Make it quick.
Make it quick. Yes. Yeah, no! That shit. This too American, dude. I'm going old school. Who wants this?
That was my favorite scene. I guess that's one of the more disturbing characters because he's so excited to be there and can't wait to get in there and do these horrible things.
And it just stands out because the rest of the movie is so bloody, and this is sort of this one moment that's not in a dark dungeon. It's in like this bright locker room.
The revenge scene at the end is one of my favorite movie moments, actually, because I have not had that experience since like the mid-'80s in like an Indiana Jones flick. I mean, everybody went nuts.
The revenge scene at the end of Hostel is so satisfying. You wanted him to get away from the torture chamber, but more than anything, you wanted him to give it to that Dutch guy. And he does.
At the very first screening, when Jay Hernandez started cutting the fingers, people were like, yeah, yeah. People were standing up, applauding, high-fiving, cheering. People just came out of the theater just pumped. They loved seeing that guy get it.
Quentin Tarantino once said that Hostel is like a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's got boobs and gore, two great tastes that taste great together.
Oh my God!